I'm Jonathan Carter with the Autism Science Foundation. Here with me is Dr. David Mandell. He is the Associate Director of the Center for Autism Research at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Dr. Mandell, thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So your current research focuses on service delivery. What exactly is service delivery and why is it important?
So we do an increasingly good job of developing interventions that help individuals with autism address core symptoms, address other problems that they often have, address some of the support needs of the family. Those interventions are generally developed in university-based research settings by clinicians with a lot of experience, and then they never make their way into the community. In fact, some people have estimated that the gap between the development of an efficacious intervention and its dissemination into the community is about 17 years. And so most of my research focuses on how we decrease that gap. How do we make sure that people in the community are getting the best interventions that they possibly can as quickly as they can? And that's generally what we mean by services research.
So with so many of our services focused primarily on children, how can we expand upon these services to also focus on adults?
Well, first, I don't think we've done a great job with kids to begin with. I mean, I think we have a lot of work to do to make sure that what children with autism are receiving in the community looks like what they think they should be getting, matches some standard of care. But certainly that's even worse for adults with autism. And I think that there are a lot of reasons for this. One is that we've traditionally thought of autism as we've confused being a disorder that originates in childhood with a disorder of childhood. And we've tended to forget that individuals with autism grow up to be adults with autism. And so people who have focused on autism, on any aspect of autism, but certainly on improving outcomes, have generally tended to focus on children. And they've focused on younger and younger children with the idea that there's this developmental window. And if you don't get interventions to children during that developmental window, well, then it's closed and you've done the best that you can. And the best that you can hope for after that is maintenance. And that's a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it creates a sense of urgency and it gets us to focus on these younger kids. On the other hand, it means that there's a vacuum for older children and adults. In fact, if you look at educating children with autism, sort of the Bible of autism intervention, it stops at age 8. So part of the challenge is we don't have a body of proven efficacious interventions for older children and adults with autism. So it's not clear what we would expect people in the community to be implementing. So in the absence of that, there are real pockets of excellence around the country. There are groups that, without any traditional, rigorous scientific evidence to support what they're doing, have developed models that seem to work. And I think what we need to be doing in this case is rather working on a research to practice model, we ought to be working on practice to research. And we ought to be partnering researchers with community organizations that are working with adults with autism and identifying those interventions that seem to work to help manualize them, to test them rigorously, and then figure out a way to disseminate them to other parts of the country.
Absolutely. So you believe that it's important to perform research in the community rather than in the lab? Is that something that you have found to be true?
Well, it depends what your end goal is, right? If your end goal is developing a better mouse model of autism or studying the genetics of autism, then the lab is probably the best place to do that because mice are just not treated kindly in the community. But if your goal is to improve outcomes for people with autism, then you ought to go where those people are. And again, we have this gap between what happens in the lab setting and what happens in the community. An excellent example of that is the common notion that children with autism ought to receive 40 hours of intervention a week. And often that's translated into 40 hours of intensive one-to-one behavioral therapy. Well, my typically developing children couldn't sit still for that. And it's probably not appropriate for children with autism. And it's not feasible in public school settings. And I think if the interventionists who are developing these kinds of interventions started in the school and looked at the environment in which children are receiving intervention and developed their interventions accordingly, we'd see a lot better translation of research findings into practice.
So you work on the Philly AIMS project, which is the largest treatment trial in the country. And what can we expect to learn from that project that can help other school districts and other school children?
So Philly AIMS stands for Autism Instructional Methods Study, because you are nothing without a good acronym. And it's a study that comprises a partnership between our team at Penn and the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and the School District of Philadelphia. And we've partnered to figure out the best ways to move evidence-based practice into community settings. So we've picked one intervention. It's called Strategies for Teaching Based on Autism Research, or STAR, and it is composed of 3 ABA-based instructional strategies: discrete trial training and pivotal response training and teaching and functional routines, and it's matched with a curriculum. And we've looked, in the first year of our study, we randomly assigned teachers to receive training in that intervention or another intervention to see which one was better. In the second year, the district chose STAR as the intervention they wanted to make as their standard of care. And so we trained all teachers and classroom assistants in that intervention to study practice effects and factors that were associated with both fidelity of implementation and outcomes. And now we're in the third year of the study, where our goal is to figure out the best way to transfer capacity to continue the intervention from our research team to the school district. And in each of those years, we've learned something different. And we have a lot more to learn, I think, as we review our data, because data collection has just been completed. So in the first year, one of the things we learned is that teachers can implement these intensive, comprehensive programs, but they need a lot of support to do it. And when they do it well, we see amazing outcomes for kids. And that means that we should not be giving up on large school districts like Philadelphia, where traditionally we've tended not to partner because it seems so difficult. And that if we can create these kind of partnerships, we can create changes for a huge percentage of children in the U.S. There are 16,000 school districts in the U.S., so the top 500 in size, so that's less than 3% of all school districts, serve 43% of all children in the U.S. So if we can figure out how to make changes in these large school districts, we will be serving a disproportionately large number of children with autism. So that's the first thing we learned, is you can work with these districts, you can affect good change. In the second year, we learned that teachers make a lot of different decisions about how to adapt these programs. And sometimes they make really good decisions. So we saw teachers who were not implementing the program with what we might call fidelity, who were making different decisions about other programs to bring, other elements to bring in or elements to leave out, and they were getting great outcomes. And what that tells us is we have a lot to learn from teachers about how to work in these environments. That we've traditionally thought about the implementation process as another expert referred to as disparagingly as the empty vessel process, right? That these community agencies or community practitioners are empty vessels whom we will fill with our research knowledge. And the reality is they're doing a lot of really good stuff, and we should be learning from it. And again, using this practice to research model to figure out what works best in these settings with these children. So that's what we're learning from the second year. And in the third year, we're learning that the task of capacity transfer from us to the district is really challenging. That they have a lot of competing priorities. Often these large school districts are in great flux. They may not have the internal capacity to maintain these kind of programs. And so maintaining a university-public partnership for an extended period of time once the grant is done becomes really important. I think it's really important that people who want to do this research don't do what a mentor of mine refers to as drive-by research. The idea that you have a project, you put it in a community, the community grows dependent on the program that you've developed, then the grant funding ends and you move on. And now you have all these people who've become dependent on that program, and it's no longer available to them. So from moment one, it becomes really clear that you need to focus on how to make sure that those communities will be able to sustain those programs. And that's what we're struggling with right now.